about using DH in the literature classroom, and then Lynette is going to be talking about style in her own research. And then on Friday's presentation, it's going to be a little more theoretical, talking about feminism and race in DH. So for those of you who don't know, my name is Dr. Reese, and I am a visual teaching fellow here in the English department. And like I said, I'll be talking about DH in the literature classroom using some of the tools that I learned at this past summer's DHSI. So before we talk about using DH in the literature classroom, I think it's important to ask ourselves some questions. So the first is, why do we as literature scholars use the digital humanities? What do we actually gain from that? Or maybe the better way of phrasing that is, some students using computers with their books. When do we as literature scholars use the digital humanities? When we use the digital with our books, we have to remember that our books all of a sudden become quantified, so they become numbers in the system. So this is from my own research. This is a SVM, or Support Vector Machines, classifier of L.M. Montgomery's orphan text compared to Susan Warner's The Wide Wide World. And so I'm currently writing a book on the definition of North American girls fiction, and with that, I theorize that Warner's The Wide Wide World is sort of the seminal girls text. And so here you see The Wide Wide World is in green, and even when it's compared to Montgomery's later orphan text, she wrote things like Anne of Green Gables or Emily of New Moon, that Warner's text, the green, becomes the dominant throughout, and only towards the end of the novels do we see differentiation with Montgomery's text in red starting to kind of split away from it, which makes sense because Warner's text continues to kind of keep Ellen, the main character, suppressed. She kind of continues to listen to other people and obey them, whereas Montgomery's heroines, in their own way, have their maybe small amount of agency and still breaking slates, in a sense. The other benefit, or one of many other benefits of using DH, is that it can look at a lot of data. So these are all books that I theorize are girls' literature. And yes, I have read all of these books, but unfortunately I can't keep all of these books in my head at one time. So if I want to compare them to Warner's The Wide Wide World, which I use as the main text here, if I stick it into Stylo and R, I'm able to then compare each one of these texts to sections of The Wide Wide World and see the differentiation. And in fact, if you look, the little kernel is the one in the dark red, and then, or no, that's the one in green, and then Understood Betsy is in the dark red, and they both veer away the most from The Wide Wide World. And the little kernel features a protagonist who has a huge temper, which you don't normally see in girls' literature. And Understood Betsy, she's given a lot of freedom and agency, which you also don't usually see. She gets to make her own decisions. And so in that way, you can start to see those pulling away from what we consider to be the standard girls' texts, which is something that I could tell you about, but it's pretty neat to actually see visualized, sort of a proof of sorts. So when we think about DH, though, we have to think about what are some of these limitations when we use the digital humanities. Computers aren't humans. They're definitely not literary scholars. So we need to be cognizant of how we feed information to the computers and trust our own literary knowledge. There's a chance that if we find a result from a computer that's very surprising, that the computer is wrong, / we did something wrong in inputting our data. We also have to remember that literature almost never follows a set of rules, which can make it difficult to break down into numbers. The other kind of flip side of that is that literary scholars aren't usually coders. So we have to make sure that we don't treat DH as a black box, but do our best to understand the way in which the computer is reading the materials we give it. And then realize what we do, how the buttons we select, the text we choose, whether or not we choose to clean the text does affect our results. And finally, we also need to realize that DH has level of privilege with it, which is something that Meg and Bianca are going to talk about on our Friday, November 16th presentation. The tools themselves, knowledge themselves aren't always accessible to everyone. But despite these limitations, the future for all intents and purposes is digital. And so when we teach literature to our students, something we need to consider is not just teaching them close reading or theory, but also teaching them how to use the digital tools to analyze literature. Like what I've done here. So for today, I'm going to be showing you 3 different tools that I learned at DHSI and have used in the classroom and in my own research. They're ranging from the easiest to implement to the most difficult, but don't worry, I've done them all with success with my students, so they're really not that difficult, as you will see. So because technology is spotty, I've chosen screenshots to demonstrate with you, and then I've got links to the resources afterwards. And feel free, I've got the websites if you want to follow along as well. So the first one is annotating with Prism. So if you don't know, Prism is, Prism is an annotation tool. When you log on to Prism, you have to create an account, you sign in, and you can create a new Prism. The hardest part about Prism is finding an online copy of your text, but through things like Poetry Foundation and whatnot, Project Gutenberg, I guess if you're really ambitious for your poor students, you can easily locate things and add it here. And then you're going to choose up to three facets that you want them to annotate using. And then you get the rest of the information, description, whatnot. So for my fairy tale class that I'm teaching online, my introduction to literature, we've been reading fairy tales, and I've just introduced them to poems. And so this is actually the assignment they did last week. I put Edna St. Vincent Millay's Bluebeard onto Prism, and I wanted them to look to see how it's similar to Perrault's Bluebeard, which we've read together, how it's different, and also to note the poetic devices that were being used. And you can see I've had the instructions here, the descriptions. So when a student completed it, this was their decision. And what I like is there's really no right or wrong way, which is what I'm always trying to teach students to an extent, is that they have the freedom when they're annotating to uncover the meaning that they find. And so you'll see in these results here, for one of the words, the results split 3 ways. A third of the students thought that it was similar to Bluebeard, a third thought it was not, and a third thought that it was a poetic device. So one of the major pros of Prism is that you're able, as the instructor, to narrow down the annotations, narrow down the focus. I've used Hypothesis as well, and they can kind of go anywhere with that, whereas this, I just wanted them to think about how is it similar to Perrault, how is it different, where are their poetic devices. It's also really pretty, it makes a really nice, clear annotation visualization, and the students are then able to see each other's annotations. One of the cons, though, in the same way that it narrows down the instructor's focus, is that the students have to kind of work within the boundaries that we give them. So their creativity, their depth of analysis is definitely limited. They're not able to write next to it why they think the way they do. What are the similarities to Perrault's Bluebeard? What are the differences? what is the poetic device? It's just a highlighting. So, but it's good to get it started. I use it as the prompt to a discussion post. So afterwards, they then need to reflect and write about what it is that they saw and did. So I wouldn't recommend just doing this. I would recommend using it as sort of a jumping off place. The next that I'm going to show you is Voyant. And all of these are free open access softwares. So it's easy to implement. When you log on to Voyant, this is what you're going to see. And you can either put in a URL or you can upload a document from your own hard drive. I would recommend, so I often use this for Project Gutenberg texts, taking it and downloading it and then cleaning it, because if you put in a Project Gutenberg text with all of its copyright information, when you read it, it's going to be telling you a lot about Gutenberg and copyright and these things. So something to consider is scrubbing, and I have the students often reflect on that, what it is they scrub. Do they scrub chapter titles, etc., and how does that affect their reading? So once you upload and hit reveal, which I think is super fun, they don't just say go, it's reveal the information. This is what you will see. So I've done this before in class with my students doing the bluest eye, and they've had to write an essay on it. This is from my own research. I did a chapter on Pollyanna that I used with Voyant. And so other scholars have theorized that when Pollyanna uses the glad game, because it's her father's glad game, that she is reifying the patriarchy. And I've never thought that to be the case, and have made my argument, and then using Voyant, the magic of computers, no, it's not magic, the analysis was able to support my hypothesis. So take that, other scholars. When you use Voyant, you'll see it gives you a nice series, a word cloud. It gives you the entire text that you've inserted. So this is a great way to see, oh crap, I forgot to remove all of the Project Gutenberg data. Down here, it gives you the context for it, which is fantastic, because a lot of times if you type in here what words you want to look at for your frequencies, you'll think, oh my goodness, this word is showing up a lot. This happened with my students to the bluest eye. Well, it turns out the header for the bluest eye, so they were like, wow, eye shows up all the time. Well, it's just every other page had the title of the novel on the top, and so this gives you that context for it. So I typed in father with an asterisk behind it, which means that anytime father shows up as father's plural or father's possessive, and then I typed in game, because Pollyanna rarely calls it the glad game. That's what we as a society call it. She usually just refers to it as the game. Never games, so it doesn't work to put an asterisk behind it. This is how it shows up with the raw frequencies. So you'll see sort of at the beginning, the other scholars are right. Father takes precedence over the game, because every time she talks about the game, she's talking about her deceased father, and he's sort of the reason she has the game. And in fact, here, it's almost the exact same. We've got 10 times mentioning father and 11 times mentioning game. But as time moves on, the game takes a life of its own, and she's no longer telling the story of her father teaching her this game when she received crutches instead of a doll. It's a real uplifting story. Instead, the game begins to take precedence, and the only reason that father shows up really strong here when you look in context is because Aunt Polly, Pollyanna's caretaker, doesn't know about the game, because Pollyanna's been banned from speaking about her father, and so their maid Nancy is explaining to her, this is why you don't know about this is why all the townspeople know about it, this is what the game is, and she keeps saying father. She's like, Pollyanna's been banned from speaking about her father. So this isn't actually Pollyanna talking about her father, this is Nancy explaining. And so, and then by the end, game has just almost completely overshadowed father. So you can see they're definitely linked, especially at the beginning, but I would argue that Pollyanna has taken the glad game sort of as her own sorts. So, pros and cons for using Voyant. A definite pro is that it's an easy to understand text analysis. So even if you don't know a ton about Pollyanna, you can see that father shows up a bit, right? Game is pretty consistent word use. And I think it's a great tool for exploration analysis. I often assign it as the students don't have a thesis yet. I want them to kind of figure out what the analysis is saying about what themes might be emerging. And then what's also great is it provides that context immediately for your findings. So you can realize if, father is because other people are talking about it, or Pollyanna's talking about it, or it's from a different story altogether and it's not Pollyanna's father. And then it's really easy to use Project Gutenberg, other online texts. Con is that it's notoriously slow. I will have my students in class using it, and inevitably it's crashing on 10 of my students' computers. And I have to say, when you go home and you use it, it'll be fine. Look on someone else's. The other thing is it doesn't save data that I've been able to find, so you have to re-upload your text each time. So you want to make sure you keep it in your text in an easily accessible place, because you're not going to be able to go back and find it. But I think overall, for what it offers, it's been pretty successful in my classes and in my own research. The final thing I'm going to show you today is mapping using Google Maps and Google Spreadsheets. And this is really great to sort of, if you have information that you want to visualize. I did this in my cultural studies and pop arts class, where we are learning fairy tales as well. And so in this research, I wanted them to prepare to write an essay on the cultural background for a fairy tale. And we're really focusing on the fact that fairy tales are universal in some way, that they use certain ideas, whether it's warning girls for their safety, or what could happen if a marriage goes wrong, Bluebeard, that these ideas are sort of the emphasis behind fairy tales. And so they were to choose 5 different fairy tales that have the same sort of story. So in this instance, it's 5 different versions of Little Red Riding Hood. And I chose 9 categories that I wanted them to focus on, and then it was up to them to create a 10th category. So in this instance, the category was the fate of the heroine, because it's Little Red Riding Hood. Does she live? Does she die? And then the students were expected to find the research for this. So a lot of this came from our textbook. You could read in the footnote where it was published, what country. They had to do the research to find the latitude and longitude, the title, the author, or in the fairy tale's case, the reporter, the year it was published, the language it was written in, and then they needed to create a summary of 3 to 5 words. And then the 10th category. It's important to do it in Google Spreadsheets because it imports so easily from Google Maps. If you're like, but I love Excel so much, first of all, I don't understand that, but second of all, it's just not going to import as clearly. So when you log into Google Maps, maybe you do not realize this, but there is a menu at the top left side, the little 3 bars, and it's going to give you the option to select your places. I did not know this was here until someone told me this. And in that, you can create your own maps. So when you hit your places, this pops up and you select maps. And at the very bottom, you can see these are my students' fairy tale maps. They submitted to me. I'm very proud of them. But you can hit then create map of your own. And what is a huge con of this, I find, is that there's a lot of steps. None of the steps are very difficult. A lot of them are quite intuitive, but there are a lot of steps to it. So it's definitely something I demonstrated in class. I haven't been brave enough to try this with my online class yet, but I now have all these screenshots that I'm thinking I could turn it into a tutorial. So when you go into your new map, at the top you're going to create a title, and then underneath your untitled layer, you're going to hit import. And when you hit import, if you're logged into Google, what's going going to automatically pop up is going to be your Google Drive. And you can see right down there is my Little Red Riding Hood spreadsheet. So I'm going to click on that. And what's going to then pop up, it's very, very tiny, so it's hard to see. But the first thing is, how do you want to position your place markers? And it's automatically going to assume that you want to do latitude and longitude because Google is very smart. And you're going to hit continue, and then it's going to say, what column do you want to use to title your markers? So I chose the fairy tale title, and then you hit finish. And it's going to look a little bit like this. So you can see 3 of my fairy tales are right there. The purpose of having the 10th column for my students is I wanted to differentiate it by color. And so there's it says group places by, and then my drop-down menu, it has all 10 of my columns. And so I chose Fate of Heroine, and so you can see lives, dies are then going to be different colors. And I'm going to keep my labels as the fairy tale title. And then when you see it scrolled out, you can see here are all 5 of my fairy tales. Purple, the heroine lives. Green, she dies. And then if you click on it, you can see the information. So where it was published, the country, and this is the Mount Lawn region. So that's where it's at. And that's where then my little icon is. So yeah, it becomes a very clear visualization of, we often think of Little Red Riding Hood as being very European, and yes, there are definitely 3 versions there, but we have one from China, and we also have one from South Africa, so it's not necessarily as European as perhaps we're familiar with. So, pros, it's really good for spatial information, it's really good for creating that information, visualization, for organizing the information. The con is it requires several steps. Your students have to make sure they're paying attention that day. And of course, there is a level of surface analysis happening here. Yes, I get to see the different visualizations on the map, but I'm not necessarily then interrogating how these cultures are affecting it. But that's why I use this as a precursor. The students are then supposed to choose one of these fairy tales to analyze with a cultural lens for their essay following this. So it's all about how you use it. In conclusion, I think that digital tools have more to them than just being flashy. I think they can inspire our students to be critical, to think about text from a different angle, and I've definitely seen that in my own class. And it can sometimes inspire a different level of engagement because my students are always so relieved not to hear they're writing an essay. What they don't realize is sometimes they're writing more words than they would with an essay, but they're excited to kind of come at the text from a different way. Thank you so much.